Well, the DA and the IFP have signed a service delivery pact in KZN. It happened yesterday, and it comes after 6 months of discussions in an effort to unseat the ANC in the province. Some of the objectives of the pact include job creation and eliminating corruption in municipalities. The agreement was signed by IFP provincial chairperson Thami Ntuli and his DA counterpart, Dean Macpherson. But let's unpack the pact itself and what a DA-IFP coalition would look like and what it would mean for the 2024 elections. Senior Research Associate at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute, Dr. Imraan Buccus, joins us this morning. Dr. Buccus, it's great to see you. I suppose this is what they mean when they say moonshot pact. It's shooting for the moon in many respects, just taking a look at the objectives of the pact, ensuring that communities have access to basic services, sustainable electricity, supporting the devolution of power with constitutional legislative framework. There's a lot of big words being used in this pact. What's your first sort of thinking as you take a look at primarily the objectives?
Morning, Michelle. Thanks for having me. Well, I think the first thing to say is that bearing in mind where the state of our politics is, I think all kinds of configurations are possible prior to the 2024 elections. And perhaps the other thing to bear in mind is that when we look at the last local government elections, that's pretty much a good indicator of what one could expect in 2024. Mm-hmm. And if you start to put some of the other pieces together in the country and particularly in KZN, you have utter disillusionment to the ANC nationally, provincially, and you have an increase in support for the IFP in KZN and for the DA. So in many ways, this kind of pact and this kind of relationship between the DA and IFP is no surprise. Both these parties sort of lend themselves and market themselves as championing constitutionalism, the right of law, etc. So I think it does make sense. Maybe just to also paint a context for the IFP. This party was on a dramatic decline since 94. It came in KZN at 50% in 94, and 10 years later was at 10%.
Right.
So a catastrophic decline. And then in the last election, you started to see an incline. So, 16% IFP in KZN, 14% DA. That kind of provides some of the ingredients for a possible cohesive relationship going forward.
Yeah, perhaps before 2019, we would have almost written off the IFP. Is that fair to say? And it's, as you say, up until 2019 where we saw that sort of marginal recovery with 16%.
Yes, absolutely. I myself described the IFP as the last kicks of a dying horse. But there are a number of reasons. I think principally amongst them, the disillusionment with the ANC. The other reason in KZN could be the implosion of the NFP. And I think the IFP benefited significantly from that implosion. And then, of course, there are a number of other factors on the ground that are pushing people towards the IFP.
You call it disillusionment, Dr. Buccus, but in your article, which I'm referring to this morning, you also talk about a deep pessimism with the ANC, even a deep anger in KZN.
Yes, I think the anger that people feel towards the ANC, like they do in other parts of the country, is really similar. But at the same time, what's happening to the ANC is not at all surprising. This does happen to liberation movements 3-4 decades into power. They do start to implode, in large part driven by infighting and corruption. And I think we've seen that, from Zambia to Kenya to so many other countries on the African continent. So in that respect, if one draws from the historical trajectory, that's not surprising. But I think, what is concerning for me is that in a country with such a remarkable tradition of the left, we have to opt for the possibility of a DA-IFP coalition in KZN. And for me, many people might disagree, but I think that's a move to the right. That's a move to a kind of conservative politics. Despite our critique of the ANC, this is a party with a really strong tradition of national liberation, nationalism, etc. And then it started to get it all wrong. But, this move to the right for me is concerning. I think concerning for many reasons. I think, we're likely to see a move towards xenophobic politics, an increase in a kind of conservatism, especially with the IFP, in terms of gender, in terms of a push towards traditional authority, and in so many other ways. So I think it is a move to the right politically in KZN if this were to happen.
Do you reckon that these kinds of alarm bells, that these kinds of discussions would have come up in the drawing up of this pact between the DA and the IFP?
I think so. I also think these parties are just so different. Yes, they are similar in some ways, but also so different. And that difference is, the political culture of these parties. The Democratic Alliance, despite our critique, does have a culture of accountability. Less so perhaps in the IFP. I think the IFP, like the ANC, continues to be driven by the politics of patronage. In a province like KZN, there's lots of social capital to draw from linkages you have, from contacts you have, and your political ascendancy can be informed by that. Also the idea of political killings, like KZN is well known and infamous for political killings. And in the IFP, there is a culture, if you are straying in a direction that you should not be, if you are kind of preventing that patronage to occur, those kinds of political killings are really possible.
Yeah.
So I think the political culture in these two parties are vastly different.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of discussions we'll be having in the run-up to the 2024 election, Dr. Buccus, not least of which the important role that the youth vote will surely play in next year's election. I understand, you'll correct me here, that we have millions, I think the number is 16 million, young people who could potentially vote but perhaps haven't even registered to vote next year. I suppose the onus now is on parties going into pacts like this one to convince that young vote that they are a viable option.
No, absolutely. I think, Michelle, in a country like South Africa, like in many countries on the African continent, where 50% or more of the population is under 35, young people really have the potential, as cliched as it may sound, to really change their societies. But the other fact is that young people don't turn out to the polls. Take a party like the EFF that is meant to attract the young vote, yet barely hovers on 10%. If it were to attract large numbers of the young vote, that could change dramatically. So yes, people, 18 to 25, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Young people don't register, don't turn up to vote. But if that were to change, and if there's great mobilization on the part of the DA-IFP, I think that could alter the support that any party is likely to get if more young people turn up at the polls. Yeah,
and ironically, the objectives, the first point on the objectives of this IFP-DA pact is ensuring that communities have access to basic service delivery, right? That kind of first point will hit a real nerve with the majority of our country struggling with service delivery issues. But, a lot of analysts have talked about why the youth vote perhaps doesn't play as big a role as it potentially has to play. And it's because, Dr. Buccus, the youth can't see the correlation between placing your mark, putting down that X, and having your real circumstances change.
Yes, Michelle, you're absolutely right. I think, in the developed world, one's political activism or political consciousness, etc., in large part is determined by electoral participation. In South Africa, I'd say less so. And you're right, young people don't see why it's significant to vote, because of course that doesn't translate into major changes in their local context.
Yeah.
But we are seeing more young people politically active, maybe not electorally, but mobilizing in communities, taking part in civic movements. So I think young people in South Africa are not necessarily measuring their political activism or participation through electoral participation, but it's happening in so many other ways. And, we're certainly not getting service delivery right. In any society, effective local governance is the central pivot in a society building exercise. But, like we see all around us as the most protest-rich country in the world, we certainly are not getting it right. And that's not, the way to attract the young vote or any vote at all.
Absolutely. The DA and IFP signing a service delivery pact in KZN. It's one of many, many conversations we will have in the run-up to what is being called a watershed election in 2024, being compared to the 1994 elections in our country. Dr. Imraan Buccus, let me thank you for your time.